All right, so good evening, everyone. I am Carmen Tanner Slaughter, and welcome to the Wolfer. And tonight, our guest is Angela Jackson Brown. Angela is an award winning writer, poet, and playwright who teaches creative writing in English at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. Angela is a graduate of Troy University, Auburn University, and the Spalding low-residency MFA program in creative writing. She has published her short fiction, creative nonfiction, and poetry in the Louisville Journal, the Appalachian Review, and other journals. She is the author of Drinking from a Bitter Cup, her debut novel, a volume of poetry, House Repairs, and this beautiful book that we are talking about tonight, When Stars Rain Down. And it has been on so many lists. I couldn't even remember them all. And I was like, let me just scan through. And it's like, rave reviews from Cyrus House and Crystal Wilkinson, and starred review from Library Journal and BuzzFeed and Frolic and Goodreads and The Hub and NetGalley and Publishers Lunch. Like, everybody is saying, read this book. And then this is the gorgeous cover for her debut book, which as soon as I finished When Stars Rain Down, I had to go on and get this because I wanted to read it right away. So it is available, Drinking from a Bitter Cup, and I read it in one sitting. And we may talk about that a little bit too if we run out of time, because both of the characters are really endearing. So I wanted to talk about how you do that so well. But anyway, welcome, Angela. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Carmen, for inviting me. I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to tonight.
And I just wanted to tell you that when I was going to your website to get like just some general info, and I saw about the Laying Our Burdens Down conference, and I was able to attend that. And I wanted to tell you how well done it was for a first time event that you planned in a couple of months, and how much I loved it. So before I forget, I just wanted to thank you for that, because it was very, very healing, and I met some great people, and we're still in touch. So thank you for that as well.
Absolutely. So glad you were able to attend.
So let's talk about When Stars Rain Down.
Yes.
The first thing I want to ask you is, how did the title come to you?
Well, this title did not come to me. That was not the original. No, that wasn't the original title for the book. It was originally called Shoot Across the Sky. And when you publish a book, one thing that I learned with the first book is that even though it's my work, the publisher gets the final say on the title. Now, usually they'll try to work with you, especially if you have a title that you're just married to.
Right.
So, for example, I came up with the title Drinking from a Bitter Cup, and I was adamant. That's the name of the book. I don't want to hear anything else.
Yeah.
But for this particular book, it was a placeholder. It wasn't necessarily a title I felt married to. So the sales team and the editorial team, they have what they call titling meetings, and they usually have them like once a week. And so they had probably 2 rounds of titling meetings before we actually got to When Stars Rain Down. But when I heard it, I knew it. I said, yeah, that's my title.
Yeah. Because if I am really taken with the title, I'll pay close attention as I'm reading to see when maybe it'll pop up in the actual book. And so when I got to the section where Opal says that, I was just like, oh, this is so beautiful. But so yeah, I just wondered if
during the revision.
Yeah. So I just wondered if that was like the title from the beginning, or it was just like plopped in there just so perfectly, and then you pulled it out and made it the title. I was real curious about that. So tell us just a little bit, a brief synopsis about the book before we get to my questions, so that people who haven't read it yet know what it's about.
Absolutely. So When Stars Rain Down is about a young girl who's about to turn 18 during the summer of 1936 in a rural fictional town called Parsons, Georgia. And the summer it's already starting to be problematic with the drought going on. So tempers are at the highest level of angst. And on top of that, you have the racial tension that's been going on off and on in this particular community. So we get to see Opal as she struggles with, growing up and establishing her own identity, falling in love, and on top of that, dealing with the racial unrest that's happening in her community outside of Parsons, Georgia, where the Black people live, called Colored Town. So we get to see how this very tight, close community of strong Black people, how they deal with this racial turmoil and how the white people in the community respond to it. There's a root woman in the book that really says that this is the time when you have to choose sides,
right?
As white people in the community. So we get to see, do they actually choose sides, and which side is it that they select?
Yeah. And I just have to tell you that your characters, from the protagonist to even just like random people who pop in for maybe one scene, are so well done. And Opal and Sylvia also, who was the protagonist of Drinking from a Bitter Cup, like they are both so endearing, and they both kind of remind me of that. They establish trust with the reader from, their first chapter, with being able to know that this is someone you're going to fall in love. It's just, it's like Celie and Scout and Janie Crawford. Like I had that sort of a connection with both of those characters. And I was like so invested in what would happen to both of them, and the way Opal, even from the beginning until the end of the novel, we really do see her coming of age in a very subtle way. And you just did such a great job with that. And it was, I was thinking that even though it's marketed just as fiction, I hope that people will like young adults can read it, because even though there's some harsh things that happen, I think that it would be a really appropriate book for YA as well as adult, even though obviously it's just marketed as fiction. But I think young people, I think her character especially would resonate with them because of everything that she goes through and how we see her grow as she handles all these challenges that she faces over those few weeks in that summer. So the idea for this novel, how did it come to you?
When I was a student at Spalding, I entered the program based on a novel that I was hoping to work on, actually Drinking from a Bitter Cup. I planned on working on that novel the entirety of my time in the program. But one thing that you do at Spalding is that each semester you have a different mentor. Mm-hmm. And what I was finding was that I was struggling when the two mentors had different ideas of where the book needed to go.
Right.
So I made that decision. I said, well, why don't I just work on a short story collections? Because that way, when I change mentors, I can just work on a different set of stories with the mentor. So I started thinking about this fictional world of Parsons, Georgia. Don't ask me where it came from, but I'll just sometimes get a word or an image or a thought, and then I just run with it. So I started creating these characters starting in the mid 1600s, dating all the way to the 1970s.
Wow.
So if you could see my office right now, you would see their life stories are all on the walls. I have, I say they're my begats, like in the Bible. I know who begat this one and who begat that one. So I have this whole world is outlined from the white people in the community and the Black people in the community. I know where they all came from and how they, where they're going. So I somehow just decided to take the story that was related to Jimmy Earl and Opal and focus on it for this novel.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that Parsons is very much a character in this book, because it is so well described. And when she's, especially when Opal's walking down the streets and the way she perceives the land. And I thought, I could see myself walking those streets. And it reminds me a lot of my family on my dad's side. We have like the old home places down in middle Georgia. And it's very rural still for now, fingers crossed. But the way you described Parsons when I was reading it, it put me into like that area where the old home place is, where my great grandmother, the house she was born in, and all these things. So it really touched me. I felt like I knew that place just from the way you described it. So
Oh, that makes me feel good. Yeah,
yeah.
because it's a composite of where I grew up. I grew up in Ayrton, Alabama. It's I think the population there is still somewhere around 700 people. They're a
Hmm.
small, close-knit community. And when I did the research for When Stars Rain Down, I was able to spend about a good 2 weeks just outside of Atlanta.
Hmm.
And so we were able to drive the roads where my characters would have been. We got to go to McDonough, Georgia, which is mentioned a lot in the book,
Hmm.
which is an actual place.
Yeah.
So we were able to go there. My husband and I would drive the back country roads, and I tell them slow down because we got to drive the way they would in
Yeah.
1936. So we would be puffing along, and people behind us blowing their horns, and I'm like, it's okay. I need this for research. So
Yeah.
so he humored me a lot in the process of putting together this book.
Yeah. I wondered if you had grown up in Georgia as well, or if you had family here, or if you had actually visited that area like south of the city, because it was so perfect and it was clear that you didn't just like Google map it. You know how sometimes authors will Google map a place and just like look at it and kind of put it together. But I had that feeling that you had actually traveled those roads. So I just wanted to ask.
Absolutely. And even as a child, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, we're all kin. So there were, I can't
Hmm.
count how many times my daddy and I would get in the pickup truck and drive uh, to Georgia and get peaches and any other types of fruits or vegetables that really weren't growing where we were. So I was always somewhere in between those states. So I've always felt like I could probably write a book set in any one of those states and feel fairly comfortable in my
Yeah.
ability to do the storytelling.
Yeah, well, you did a phenomenal job with that as well. I mean, even things as simple as the weather, how like the air feels so heavy. Like I've had those days, and the scenes like at church.
Mm,
When you grow up in a church, you know how it is. And I don't want to like tell too much because I don't want to give any spoilers, but there were so many scenes that were set in the church that I was like, oh, I was there on that Sunday, because it hasn't really changed a whole lot. Because I mean, we still attend the church that my family it's in a couple of weeks it'll be like 144 years that we've been in that church.
yeah.
So those things were, and Southern fiction is so dear to me anyway because I'm a woman of the South, but I love it when someone who really gets it writes about the South and presents the way we live and the way we navigate and the way our history has been without it being cliche or hokey. And you did such a beautiful job of that. So thank you for
Thank
that.
you. Yeah,
Um,
I I have to be careful because I don't ever want to critique someone else's work or passion, whatever it is they want to write about. People are welcome to write about, but
mhm,
I definitely felt a calling to do this novel about Black domestic workers because so often when people write about, Black maids, Black housekeepers, Black nannies, they're always very one dimensional. And it's usually because the people don't know. You can
yeah.
research certain things, but there are just some
Mhm.
experiences that if you never saw it firsthand, if you've never lived through it yourself, it's very difficult to try to put yourself into that headspace. So I really wanted to pay homage to those women and girls that I saw as a child to tell their story the way I think they would have wanted it told. At least I hope I did.
Oh, you definitely did. Um, and so I want to talk a little bit about the characters. And I know now that you have this whole like wall full, so you know like everything about them. And you probably won't have one, but did you have a favorite character that you enjoyed writing more than anyone else? I mean, Opal's the protagonist, so obviously she's gonna get a lot of time and Granny, but was there anyone else that you really loved writing about?
I really did. I mean, I love, as you imagine, I loved all of them. There were some scenes, I won't say characters as much as there were some scenes that stood out to me that I really enjoyed. Like, I enjoyed the scenes um, with, with Opal and Miss Peggy. I liked being able to show the dynamics between this elderly white woman who has these black folks coming into her house cleaning and cooking, but there was a dynamic of family that still
Yeah.
existed between them. I mean, Granny always made it clear that, yes, I know she and I are close, but there's just so far that relationship goes. But I've been that person where, I was with an auntie or an older family member friend who was cleaning houses, and I went along with them. And whatever the white kids were doing, I was doing it too. I would be in the bed taking a nap in the afternoon, or we'd all sit at the children's table and eat together. So there was never that you people go there, you people go there. So I wanted to be able to show that relationship that exists, because what we usually see is just this very hostile, combative relationship between
Right.
the white people who hired the black folks, and those existed, but there was
Yeah.
also that other from familial kind of relationship that happened in some cases.
Right. And then getting into sort of the tension that comes into play that sets everything in motion is we have, the Klan does their night ride into Colored Town, and then things kind of spiral from there. And like I said, I'm being real careful with spoilers because the book comes out tomorrow. It's available tomorrow. So when you get off this live chat, go ahead and pre-order so you can get yours and start reading it. But when that takes place and sort of the interaction between members of the white family and Opal's family was very real, because I know that that does happen. And the way that they were trying to navigate that space by, we want to protect, but we also, know that we have to handle it a certain way with the other white members of the community and whatnot. But what I loved about this book is that the way you address like some of the crisis that happens and some of the violence that happens, the way the characters respond to it is so beautifully done. And some of the ways that their inner feelings and thoughts come out resonate even now with some of the things that we see going on now, in 2021. Even though this is set in 1936, it's still so relevant. And I thought that you did a really good job of not pulling us out of the story and like making their thoughts or behaviors be what we would do now, but just like sort of the hopes and the dreams and the curiosity and the way they would approach like what is motivating these people to act that way. So I didn't know if you had to work really hard to not insert 2021 thoughts in, but to make the points that this is an enduring problem.
I think for any of us who write historical fiction, there always has to be an awareness of how does what you're writing connect with what's happening in the present. Do you see that thread? And then if you can, you tug on it a bit, but you don't completely pull it, because then you unravel the story. And like you said, I had to write in the mindset of I am a 1936 Black woman or Negro or colored girl in the case of this story. So I had to embrace everything that was a part of that day. And you're right, I had to be aware of how far I could push certain storylines,
Right.
how far I could push certain characters outside of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
And I know it, I know I've had some pushback from individuals concerning writing historical fiction. I think there are a lot of folks out there that wish that a lot of us writers would just move on, would leave the past in the past.
Right.
But I think for just the reason you described, almost every review that I have received by, say, a white reader on Goodreads it's always been this moment of an epiphany that, oh my goodness, this is happening now. Yeah. What I'm seeing in this book, I'm seeing play out on the evening news. So for them, they need that moment of, if we don't change the things that we're doing, we're going to commit the same sins that we've been committing for the beginning of time.
Yeah.
And so for me, historical fiction is not just for entertainment. I do want that. I want my readers to feel engaged with the characters. But if it doesn't say something, if it doesn't somehow shed a light on what we were doing, 40, 50, 60, 80 years ago versus what we're doing now, then, I feel like I've missed an opportunity.
I thought it was particularly well done in the scene with Opal and Jimmy Earl after the event happens, and he's trying to assure her of, his protection. And I was like, oh, you're not all white peopling. But of course, she would not have said that to him in those terms in 1936. But the way Opal responded to him was very much the way some of us have to respond to our white friends and acquaintances, colleagues, when you engage in some of these discussions, and they immediately say, oh, but I would never, and that you're my friend. And so I loved in those instances how you handled it, because it was also very different than some of the books that have been written with similar themes and similar situations, where it did show that backbone and how the Black people still stood up for themselves, even though certain things were going to happen, and they knew that there could be some pretty dangerous responses if they didn't just really humble themselves and not address it. Even and Lori Beth, I just wanted to take her in the bathroom for a come to Jesus meeting, but but even the interaction between her and Opal, and I was thinking, great intent. She had all these wonderful intentions, because she was coming from a place of not realizing those differences until someone really puts it in your face and was like, no, we are not the same. It is not the same.
And it's so funny. When I wrote that scene, I was actually going through something myself, something very similar to that, where an associate, I'll say an associate, sort of went over and above being an ally. And my response is that an ally doesn't go above and beyond what the person you're being an ally for has expressed they need.
Exactly.
Now, it's sort of like me saying, I'm hungry, Carmen, and you bring me a new outfit. And I'm like, but Carmen, I just told you I have no food in the house, and then you get upset because I'm not grateful that you just brought me a new dress and some shoes when I didn't even express a need for it. I just told you I need, I need food. So I think that sort of pushed me to write that scene, to be able to, hopefully some of those allies will read it and will say, wait, oh, so this is what she's talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. Those two stood out very strongly in light of how things are now, and how so many more people and mainly I think with things that transpired last year, really the blinders fell off for a lot of people. So they're very enthusiastic about becoming allies and not realizing to take a beat. And we often in social media discussions, and also one of you in real life, you have to tell people just listen to Black people, listen to Black women. Don't tell us what you think we want to hear. Let us tell you what you can do and the best way to go about it. And so I love that you were able to weave that message in, especially in those two scenes. So
back in the day when I would get sick, my daddy would give me castor oil. The first time he tried to give it to me, I thought I was going to die. And I remember the time after that, he put it in some orange juice, and I could take it. And I think for me, that's sort of my approach with writing, that sometimes people need some harsh medicine, but because we're just not conditioned to take harsh medicine, sometimes you have to kind of, put it in some orange juice, and so they can sip on it and not even know that they're getting medicine.
Yeah.
So, the lessons that I hope will resonate in When Stars Rain Down are such that, in the midst of reading it, it might not even hit the reader, but as they think about it, oh wait, she just taught me something here, and I didn't even know that's what she was doing.
Right. Kind of like in another great Southern story, Still Magnolias, and it's like, here, Shelby, drink your juice,
Yes.
So,
yes. Drink your juice, Shelby, drink your juice. Exactly. And I think every bit, I mean, I've been reading since before I could even read words. I would sit there with an upside down book, pretending like I was reading, because it just seemed like the most magical thing that anyone could ever do was to read words in a book. And from the earliest of age, I could almost tell you a lesson that I learned from every book that I've encountered, whether it was a book that taught me a lesson that was like, I read Going with the Wind when I was probably about 9 or 10 years old. And I didn't realize the violence that book did to me until I was a teenager or on into my 20s. How that book used propaganda to make me, a little Black girl, feel ashamed to be associated with slaves.
Yeah.
At the way in which Margaret Mitchell, characterized our people in that book, I just sucked it up and thought, oh, I want to be like Scarlett O'Hara. I want to be like them.
Oh yeah.
I wanted a hoop skirt. I wanted to be, on a veranda with my callers, my gentleman callers coming to bed. So I didn't even identify with the Black people in the book. And I thought about it later at how calculated she was to be able to write about slavery, to be able to write about, I mean, if you want to look at one of the first written accounts of white women falsely accusing Black men of sexual advances, well, all you got to do is look at Gone with the Wind and how she, portrayed our men in that book. And yet I didn't know that as a 9 or 10-year-old child. I just knew it was a big book, and I was excited to have the summer to read it.
It's so funny you mentioned that, because one of my best friends in high school, she was white, and we were just talking because she knew that I'd been reading since I was 3, and she's like, oh, have you ever read Gone with the Wind? And I was like, no. And it wasn't because of like a racial thing. It was just a book I had not yet read. And she's like, oh, you got to read it. And I think she even let me borrow her copy. And then her mom was like, you did not give her that book to read, But both she and I were like, well, she didn't mean any harm. She just thought that because it was like a classic of Southern literature and everything. And like you, of course, I sort of identify with Katie Scarlett O'Hara and her being impudent and being a meeks, and oh, Rhett Butler, he's dreamy or whatever. And then, of course, the movie is so much different from the book. A lot of people who've never read the book don't realize that. But, they rely on the glamour of the movie. But again, that's one of those books that at the time I was reading it, I didn't realize it either. I just thought, oh, this is a really good book. And then it turned out helping me make like a 5 on my AP exam, because one of the questions was write about a Southern novel that you could relate to. And I wrote this grand essay and didn't have to take English 101 when I was a freshman. So, but as I got older and looked back, then I realized perhaps why her mother had said, like, why would you give her that book? But we were young and naive and didn't have a clue. So
absolutely. And the thing that I tell people about that book, it was a well-researched book. Probably she spent 10 years, so 10 years of work on one book. It should be well researched. Right. But the historical facts, a lot of them she got exactly right on the nose. It's just the details that really had such a powerful effect on me that she wasn't thinking about me when she was writing that book. I mean, I wasn't her target audience at all. She wrote to the people that she knew would, just lap that stuff right up, and they did. you
Yeah.
know.
And it's interesting because right back there on my shelf, if you can see it, it's over there somewhere. My great aunt, who was a domestic worker who worked for a lady named Miss Peggy, had one of the original editions of Gone with the Wind.
Wow.
And I always was like, I want that book. And she left it to me. And so it's like a weird, like, family keepsake to have, because she was working for this white woman as a domestic worker. She gave her a copy of Gone with the Wind way back then. And then growing up and seeing it on her shelf and recognizing it after I knew what it was, saying, oh, I want to have that book. And so I have it.
Yeah. But you know, the book that helped me to really understand and put that book in its proper context was Roots by Alex Haley. I read Roots just, I think, slightly before the movie came out. And maybe I was reading it simultaneously around the same time. I can't even remember the dates. I know it was late 70s when the film came out. So either I had just read the book or I was reading it along with the film. And I was flabbergasted because slavery had never been explained in that way. That wasn't something that was covered at school, at least not my school.
Right.
I mean, we knew there was slavery, and you knew the bare bones of it, but I didn't connect it necessarily with any of the white people I was in school with, or their parents, or their parents' parents. It was just something that it seemed like it happened in a land far, far away, like it wasn't really a part of the American historical fiber that we were exposed to,
Yeah. So, but that's and I want to, because I don't want to get away from some of my other questions before our time runs out, but I have to, which is a great transition that you brought up. Roots is Miss Lavinia.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. So I love that character so much, and I love that you dropped her into this story, because I want to know more about her, and I'm hoping that maybe we will one day. But the fact that she, even though the people in the town called her like a hoodoo woman or whatever, but once we were able to go into her home with Opal and find out how she was really embracing all the aspects of her spirituality, and how she taught Opal about the practices of the ancestors and coming from Africa, but she didn't completely denounce Opal's Christian beliefs, and that she was this God-fearing, her family was very active in the Black church there in the town. But it was such a beautiful melding of how it's not just and or, you can be both, and how people were still that way before. That's not something new, because now there's this big push, where people are more embracing sort of those beliefs that maybe we didn't grow up with if we were, of a certain age and you just went to church. But having Miss Lavinia in there as far back as then, to show how that was a part of life, even though we don't necessarily hear about it, just I was so taken with her, and how you put just enough in there to make us want more of her. And I hope maybe we'll see her again, since you have this whole Parsons world planned out.
Yeah, she's a you asked me of a favorite character. I would say she's probably high up on the list of someone who would be considered a favorite character to me, just because of the amount of research that I did that didn't even make it into the book. For that reason alone, I hope that my publisher will express an interest in knowing the backstory of Miss Lavinia and her family, because the idea for her actually came about at my experience as a child. So the little boy in that story, and I won't give too much away, but it was almost a verbatim scene that I experienced as a small child. My adopted mother, who was very much a Christian, there wasn't a day the church doors weren't open that she wasn't there, but she took me to someone that we refer to as a root woman, because she was having love problems.
Yeah.
And to put it so I remember going into this woman's house, and Mahalia Jackson was playing. I could hear it just as clear as day. Mahalia Jackson was playing. She had all of her candles and her incense, but she also had the King James Bible on her table and her cards. And it was like overload for my senses, because I'd been taught one way in which you access God. Yet I'm walking into this woman's house, and they call her a hoodoo woman or a root woman, but I'm seeing elements of Christianity all around here. Yeah. So my little child mind was blown away. But then as I was able to do more research, and I became fascinated with Marie Laveau years and years ago. And I started researching her and researching others. And I realized that these folks were able to take for them the best of the religions that their ancestors had practiced, and the best of the Christian religion that the slave masters were forcing them to practice. Yeah. In an amalgamation, create something that was entirely their own. Yeah. So I wanted to be able to create a character like Miss Lavinia to show that she is as much a part of our history as any other religion or any other belief set. And that, like you said, the two don't have to necessarily be in contradiction of the other. Yeah. At least for me. And I'm not trying to preach it to anybody else but me, but it's how I was able to kind of wrap my brain around what I witnessed that day when I went to that root woman's house.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was great. I loved it. I loved her character, and I loved that she was so fully fleshed out, even though she's not in a lot of the book. But when she's in the book, she is in it, and she is in your face. And that one scene that you were just talking about was perfect. And even Opal's reaction to it made so much sense, and how her coming back around after other things happened, and the way Opal was able to still sort of embrace her, even though she was upset with her. You know, like I said, I don't want to spoil it, but you know what I mean. So
yes.
So we are getting close to our time being up. I think that I asked probably most of my questions. There may be a couple that I didn't, but I also wanted to just say, your story development is just so impeccable, and in both books. Like I said, I know we're talking about When Stars Rain Down, but I'm telling everybody watching, once you read When Stars Rain Down, you're going to want to go back and get Drinking from a Bitter Cup. And even though there are some differences that Sylvia and what she experiences, and the way you develop her character and the things that she goes through, is just so lovely. And with both books, I love that even though there's like some really tough moments, at the end of both books, there's so much hope. And that's what I want in a book. I don't mind going through the ringer if at the end I'm inspired, and I'm, you know, even if I cry, it's at the end, the tears might be tears of joy, even if I shed a few tears of like sorrow and sadness at what happens to these characters that I've fallen in love with. But you do a lovely, beautiful, amazing job of leaving us with so much hope and like peace, even though your characters have some really hard things that they experience. So thank you for that too.
You know, I feel like when I write a book, I've entered into a contract with my reader. And the contract is simple. I'm going to take you through some stuff with my characters. But I am going to, at the end of the day, give you a payoff. That if you can live through everything that they have to go through, I promise you, I'm not going to necessarily give you happily ever after, but I am going to leave you with the feeling that those characters are going to be okay.
And you definitely do that with When Stars Rain Down and Drinking from a Bitter Cup. So everybody, when you read it, there's going to be some moments, but at the end, you'll be okay. And there's a great cameo of a person from history in there that I won't give away. People can just wait and read about it themselves, that I loved. that you put in there, and because that's one of my favorite people from that career. I won't say what it is, but you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, you know what? I absolutely love having my fictional characters bump up against real people.
Yeah.
The book that's coming out next year is a complete revisionist history. I mean, I take history and I wring its little neck, but then I don't destroy it completely, because I don't, at the end of the day, it's sort of like Star Trek. I don't want to mess up the, what is it, the line that history
Oh yeah.
moves on. There's the continuum